Well, the latest example came on Friday in Alexandria. J.D. Vance made a pretty obvious point. He said the childless left, that's how he put it, lacks, quote, physical commitment to the future of this country. Quote, why is this just a normal fact of life for the leaders of our country to be people who don't have a personal and direct stake in it via their own offspring?
Look, what I was basically saying is that we're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies.
All of us childless cat and dog ladies are going to go from childless and crushing it to childless and crushing you in November.
No! 47% of Americans under 50 say they are unlikely to have children, and it's estimated that 45% of women will be single and childless by 2030.
They call her the cat lady. People say she's crazy just because she has a few dozen cats. But can anyone who loves animals that much really be crazy?
Often, the right wing does this thing where they say something very incendiary about a social issue, and I agree with it, but with great reluctance. Not because I have a problem with the content of the statement exactly, I am very conservative in many ways, but I have this sensitivity about tone, about cringe. J.D. Vance going into an interview and making noise about childless cat ladies is cringe. There may be some meat to his underlying concern, more on that later, but though I see the political utility in this kind of phrasing, it just grates me. One problem is the phrasing asserts a level of moral condemnation that is not deserved. Is there a moral dimension to this issue? Surely. But being a childless cat lady is not a univariable, directly conscious choice made out of malice or destructive intent. It is a status that arises out of certain environmental conditions, circumstances, and available options. It's the result of cost-benefit analysis in a complicated situation. People make choices, but their decision-making is shaped around so many other things. To glibly write them off as purposefully, obstinately choosing a certain lifestyle ignores how many cultural norms brought them there. The term childless cat lady proves so punchy that it's also easy to depend upon the language and therefore neglect a greater reality. The issue is not simply about this group of women. Their decisions did not occur in a vacuum. Nor are their decisions the only factor pushing the demographic reality now beset upon us. Childless cat ladies are responsible for their choices and the impact thereof, but they are not really the problem. The dysfunction starts much deeper. Rather than focusing on griping about these women, we would be better off understanding how the world has changed to make their choices so rational. But I don't want to create the impression that I'm fielding an unfettered defense of childless cat ladies. It grated me almost as much when I saw women on social media use this moment to display pride in their status as single, unattached, and politically active. It led me to wonder aloud on Twitter, what even are the legitimate political interests of the childless? And why should we care? The cat lady, of course, is an older archetype than the current political discourse. In the past, there were those women known as old maids and spinsters, women who remained unmarried for the duration of their life because of some quality that made them too shrill, too uncompromising, too introverted, too unpleasant to attract a husband, or really any sexual attention at all. Such women without families to raise sometimes turn to pets to fill the void, and this meme continues to today. This social category has changed, however. The modern spinster is often not a woman unable to attract a mate. She may have many, either as flings or as serial monogamous arrangements. No, her lack of marriage is not due to an issue of supply, but quality. Women are waiting longer before marrying and having children so that they can more thoroughly vet their choices. Women in their 30s are freezing eggs in hopes of finding their husband in their 40s. The biological clock has dilated, and so women are more able to engage in multiple exploratory liaisons without risk of pregnancy while looking for a permanent partner. Such women are not the same as past old maids, yet their through line remains, and cats are a popular child replacement for women who remain unattached and searching. The childless cat lady, in my mind, is today closely related to another archetype known as the awful, the affluent, white, female liberal. I'm sure this is the cohort J.D. Vance is talking about. These are middle to upper class women, highly educated and accredited. They went to good colleges, got degrees and certifications, have ambitions for their careers, and go on to helm HR departments.
I want to be a lawyer and a doctor.
These women set the standards of acceptable behavior in their work and social circles. But because of all the energy they must expend into their career and their social life, they are wary of marriage and extremely wary of children. They date and hook up, they might even move in with a guy, but they are too busy for families. Fur babies and wine bottles it is then. And don't forget that these women are extremely liberal, perhaps the most consistently, predictably liberal of any other demographic. In the past, a childless cat lady would not be much of a topic of concern, as they represented a small demographic with little social clout. They were maligned as fringe losers. It was not an enviable position, and in fact often led to lonely, economically vulnerable ways of life. Today, though, the childless cat lady is an entirely different class. To be child-free places women in a position of distinct advantage, both socially and economically, and the proportion of childless women is growing. Some of the statistics are quite stark and alarming. For example, in 2022, 21.9 million women between the ages of 20 and 39 had not given birth. This is 4.7 million more than expected based on fertility patterns before the Great Recession. The percentage of women between the ages of 20 and 39 who have never had a child has increased by 37%. Fertility rates are at near record lows, and the number of childless women is increasing. Almost half of all women in the United States were childless in 2022. And then the percentage of adults under 50 who say they are unlikely to ever have children increased from 37% to 47% between 2018 and 2023. It's important not to overstate things. Many women still have a child at some point in their lives, but the combined effect of a growing childless population and the sharp decline in the number of children women give birth to has led to pretty much everyone concluding that we are on the path to a huge demographic shakeup, if not outright disaster. China's one-child policy led to its nation facing this possibility much earlier than the others, but every country, from rich to poor, from west to east, is experiencing this fertility slowdown. This has brought with it growing anxieties about the economic repercussions and social upheaval. Fewer young people means fewer workers. Fewer workers means fewer taxes, which can be collected and used to care for a ballooning, aging population. What will happen to these nations of old if no youth are there to support them? What will happen to these economies as populations decline? The rosiest picture is the possibility that rapid degrowth of the population and the retraction of the world's economies will be only a temporary pain, which will eventually stabilize into a new norm. But this is assuming the procreational decline will eventually stop. Surely some people in the future generations will want to have children. Yet so far, the supposedly powerful biological urge has proven ineffective against simple market forces. If the share of women giving birth has fallen this sharply and this quickly, and the trend is marching globally, how confident are we that we can pull the brakes before we hit near zero, especially given that we are not entirely sure why this is happening? Grifters will try to persuade you that the fertility decline is caused by some single variable that they care about. Feminism, birth control, environmental changes, declining marriage rates, cost of living. Surely these are such factors involved. But of course these elements are nested into complex causation feedback loops, some causing the others, or sharing a common cause, or coinciding and magnifying each other. No single variable analysis has yielded a clear answer as to why this crisis is upon us. But beyond the easy explanations, I have a few suggestions. One area of cultural change has been our attitude about happiness and satisfaction. Today, above all else, we value happiness. That means we prioritize pleasure, comfort, entertainment, safety, gratification, and leisure. We want consistent access to endorphins, which we can only reliably get if we are more free from obligations to others. Thus, our definition of freedom has been increasingly in the direction of liberation, especially from any duty towards others. Rather than being subject to nature or our community, we want to be free from the ties that bind, ties like marriage, children, and communal duty. Childbirth and rearing have been one area especially changed by this attitude because, let's face it, having kids is neither pleasurable nor comfortable. Childbirth carries a significant chance of injury or death. It is one of the most profoundly painful experiences one could ever go through. Raising children requires massive investment of time and money, and demands attention and sacrifice for up to 18 years and beyond. The only reason, for most of human history, that women even put up with such a horrendous task was that choice wasn't really part of the calculus. Having kids just kind of happened. It was so natural as to be expected, and while I'm sure it was miserable for plenty of women, it was also more or less unavoidable. It's easy to understand then why the very notion of being able to choose whether to have kids, a choice that has only reliably existed for the last few decades, has brought with it a complete collapse in interest. The other change has occurred within our ideas around satisfaction. Life satisfaction is still the goal, but the way we believe it is achieved has completely changed. Now we seek life satisfaction through happiness, as if by obtaining enough feel-good chemicals, we can finally reach a state of permanent bliss. This, to me, is a crucial categorical error on the part of our culture, because previous generations understood what we're figuring out the hard way now. Trying to be happy all the time actually has deleterious effects on our satisfaction. People who do nothing but chase immediate gratification might be happy for a while, but their long-term projections are not good. This is why women who are married with children report lower levels of happiness, especially in the first few years of child rearing, but later in life report the highest levels of life satisfaction compared to their unmarried childless peers. Childless people are happier, or so the articles will tout, and this is probably true, but this happiness does not translate into satisfaction as lives progress. Regardless, it is a hard sell, maybe an impossible sell today, to tell people that having children is difficult, expensive, painful, and inconvenient, but it will give you a more satisfying and fulfilling life in 20 years. Status, prestige, clout. We all want it, and childlessness has become a part of it. In the distant past, your value to the community was likely not through wealth. Very few people rose above abject poverty, and if you weren't born into royalty, you didn't have access to that sort of status either. The best you could aspire to be was respectively productive. You had a farm or a business that earned you a living, and you had a large family for whom you could provide. Having children was a bragging point, not just because it proved your fortitude and fertility, but because it expanded your social connections, provided you labor, demonstrated your ability to support others, and ensured your own care in your old age. In cities, towns, and villages where almost everyone lived at the subsistence level, having children was your key to social status. This was especially true for women who did not have access to all points of economic production. Being barren was a debilitating state, whether you were rich or poor. It meant you lost out on certain aspects of prestige, could not pass down your wealth or land, and could not ensure the continuation of your legacy. Today, we do not primarily organize our sense of worth around our family or community. We don't care nearly as much about our bloodline or legacy, and we neither need nor desire close social connections as much as our ancestors. Instead, we are highly individualistic and economic people. Because wealth is now so much more accessible to all strata of people, we have come to value wealth above almost anything else. This has implications for childbearing because, in fact, having children is an economic drain on the individual. And as we no longer depend on our children for farm or business labor, there's really no economic upside. Logically, to have status in America today, a woman needs to abstain from having children. In fact, a fast cultural shift has evaporated the prestige of motherhood. Being a mother became something of a denigration. Being a mother of multiple children is considered trashy and unrefined. Childless couples on TikTok brag about their markers of social status: free time, lots of money, expensive vacations, robust careers. A mother might be able to grasp social status only if she makes sure her career and economic value stays primary. I should note I have noticed this shift a little back in recent years. There is some countercultural pushback that touts the value of dedicated mothers. We see evidence, for instance, that the wealthy class have recently increased in their fertility rates. But of course, only wealthy women can afford to have it all, bearing children and keeping their careers going apace. So the prestige is still truly through a show of wealth. Status through wealth has done wonders for growing our economies. Global poverty is now at the lowest levels ever. Wages are up. Jobs are plentiful. All kinds of goods are affordable for everyone. But all this goodness has opened us up to a vulnerability. What's good for us now isn't necessarily what's good for us later. Maximizing economic value and self-interest through capital exchange makes eminent sense, but it isn't the great mechanism for helping future generations. Markets, as complex systems go, travel at infinitely higher speeds than, say, biological evolution or cultural development. Mass economic extinctions occur every few decades. New life forms emerge every year. Thinking far, far into the future is virtually a waste of time in the economic market. There's no way to predict what the financial world will be like, what jobs will exist, what corporations will rise to the top. The financial situation flips around within your lifetime, likely several times over. Your only real hope is that the strong market survives long enough for your 401k to mature in time for retirement, which for most people occurs within a measly 40 to 50 years. This means in the world of economic value, it's best to extract as much as you can now in the time that you have. There's no incentive or reason to try and build an economy for people who exist in 200 years. And there's the rub. In the world of economic markets, there's no upside to giving up your wealth for children. Yet the economy still depends on children. If a small portion of people choose to not have kids, oh well, it's no big deal. That's how humanity has always been. But we're no longer in that scenario. When that self-interested, logical economic behavior is practiced at mass scale, it becomes destructive to society as a whole. Unless we expand our sense of self-worth beyond mere economic activity, there's going to be little to no impetus for anyone to reproduce. The current generation of career hunters, yuppies and their spiritual descendants, will not be persuaded to give up their status in order to start creating families. One of the emotional declines that has been tracked in the West is the acute loss of purpose and meaning. Perhaps this change started slowly, subtly, but in the recent decades, the malaise has received more attention and documentation, and we're starting to grapple with the massive implications for our society. Many now lay the problem at the feet of new atheism and secularity. It's hard not to see why. Certainly, the proponents of a godless society hoped that getting rid of false, bigoted, irrational, hostile beliefs would bring humanity closer to something of a unified purpose. But as non-religiosity has marched forward, we have not experienced a wave of renewed rationality. After abandoning a religion that offered what atheists called false purpose, most people found only vacuous and toothless replacements. As it turned out, false purpose was more comforting than none at all. Most people do find ways to create meaning and purpose, yet we see movements at the fringes that show us signs of continued emotional turmoil. We have Jordan Peterson, we have the Manosphere, we have the emergence of TradCon accounts, and homesteading TikTok. These movements are not promising men or women an easier life. In fact, each, in their own way, challenges their followers to adopt a rougher, more grueling path, whether taking up the largest burden you can bear, starting your own vegetable garden, or doing reps at the gym. They speak to these people who feel trapped in modern luxury and see no purpose in their life. As previously mentioned, having children used to be a central part of this purpose. Today, surveys have shown Americans don't see or expect to find their purpose in children. The collapse in this sense of purpose has led to antinatalist sentiment, or if not that, an ambivalence to children. Let's say you believe life is pointless. This sentiment can be measured through suicide attempts and successes, which have spiked recently. We can also see the power of this belief in the rise of opiate addiction and drug abuse, which signals a strong desire to escape the pains of everyday life. Among those who confess a belief in a purpose of life, only a slim majority report having a sense of their own. Let's say you believe the world is getting worse and it's wrong to bring more life into it. This pessimism is a common mantra of the antinatalist. framing their choice to end their bloodline as a mercy on the environment and on the future sufferer that is a new human being. Let's say you believe my existence hurts the world. Maybe you were too hard on the self-esteem coaches of the 90s because today, so much rhetoric directed at people in their formative years is now different forms of self-loathing. Whether the pain you inflict is on the environment, or on racial minorities, or on the economy, or on the healthcare system, a lot of young people are coming to the conclusion that the world will be better off once they're gone. My bloodline ends with me is a common refrain among the young seeking voluntary sterilization. Not only do they have a generalized antipathy for their ancestors, but they see themselves as not worth continuing into a new generation. We don't see the point in living. We don't see the purpose in humanity. So the natural conclusion of this nihilism is party while you can, because tomorrow the lights are going off for good. Who in good conscience would believe this and also seek to have children? Having lost the will, the desire, the optimism, the value, the status, the economic incentive, the presumption of having children, why are we surprised? A factor that I think isn't discussed enough is the one of missed opportunities. The fertility crisis, after all, isn't solely driven by a decline in interest. It's also driven by a shift that has disrupted those who want to have children. The first time I got clued into this problem was in reporting about women who freeze their eggs. Having heard all the other reasons for putting off children, you would guess women freeze their eggs mainly for career, physical comfort, or financial reasons. However, it's certainly not the latter. Freezing eggs is monumentally expensive. Neither is it in the name of comfort. Extracting the eggs involves some rather gnarly and invasive procedures. Women who choose to freeze their eggs, when asked, answered most often in this manner: I haven't found the right partner, and I'm losing time. Time, opportunity. These are intangibles not easily bought on the market. We are used to talking about the incel problem for men as we contemplate why there is a cohort of men who desire relationships but cannot get them. But there's a similar conflict along reproductive lines. Out there exist men and women alike who want kids, maybe even desperately, but cannot somehow find each other in time. And as we know the age of having children continues to move later and later, it seems that the issue isn't just that people are choosing to have kids later, though that's the case for many, but also people aren't finding each other until it's too late. They aren't settling or marrying until they're in their 30s or 40s. Marrying and having kids later is sensible from a practical, economic, and stability standpoint. We can look back on our 20s and see how we were not as formed or ready, yet the trade-off is real. A woman's fertile window declines rapidly after 30. Men's fertility trails off too, by the way. Start off having kids in your 30s, and the chance of having 3 or 4 kids becomes thin. Time has shrunk. The cultural pressures to delay marriage and children is high. I've heard of couples in their 20s being told by their family and friends that they're too young to get married, and definitely too young to have kids. I understand the pressure we put on 15 and 16-year-olds to put this choice off. Get some schooling and finish off puberty first. I could even get the apprehension about 2 fresh-faced 18-year-olds trying to get married. But the push to delay has gotten absurdly aggressive and continues to emphasize education and career, as if either of those things have a neat and convenient endpoint from which we can comfortably stop to have a family. This has trapped a lot of people into delayed adolescence and procrastination. It's easy to get stuck in "we're thinking about it" mode for years on end. And this is all the problem for when couples have already met and made decisions. Much worse has become the dearth of opportunities on the dating market. I don't think I have to say much to convince any of you that dating apps and the environment around them has made modern dating a kind of hell. More specifically though, despite online dating's far reach, its algorithms, and its expansive pool of applicants, many people struggle to form relationships through them. You've seen the charts and the stats. The overrepresentation of males on the platform, the failure rate, the sheer number of hoops to jump through before any interaction leads to a real date. Chalk it up to the paradox of choice, sex dynamics, hypergamy, whatever. The point stands that a lot of opportunities are being lost in the shuffle, leaving some individuals frozen out entirely. We can imagine how this was different in the past. Our choice of partner was once greatly limited and local. especially before mass urbanization. Family connections drove arrangements. Community connections locked you in, not with your optimal spouse, but perhaps with someone who is as good as you could hope to get. Expectations were lower in some ways, but behavioral expectations were more strict. This narrowed things down and, as a consequence, probably made the decision easier. I'm not a Luddite suggesting that we end online dating. What I'm trying to get at is that the open sexual and dating market has a cost, and that cost has been a systemic failure to connect people in ways that lead to family formation. Rather than leading to a maximalized playing field where everyone gets their best choice, the current dating market feels more like a dystopian monopoly where most people get nothing while the top percent sit on their sterile hoard. This is a situation rife with potential disaster and conflict. Wars have started over less. I've spent a good while describing what we might call the problems causing our low birth rate. Now you may assume that I'd close out with some suggestions on how to fix things. Unfortunately, I do not have prescriptions at the ready. J.D. Vance and Kamala Harris have suggested using tax incentives to encourage people to have children, or at the very least, to lessen the economic burden for people with children. This has been dressed up as a solution to the incoming demographic crisis. You may not be surprised to know there is little evidence that such policies would have the intended effect. Other nations grappling with low birth rates have tried economic incentives, like tax cuts and free childcare, and even punitive measures against childless couples. I can justify some of these policies from an economic standpoint. Childless individuals are going to end up an economic burden in their old age, having no children who can take care of them, and having not contributed new workers to the economy. And so it may be proper to ask more from them, but these policies don't actually work. They don't bring up the birth rate. I believe the primary reason is that economic strain is not the real issue. Children are objectively expensive, but we are also objectively much, much richer than previous generations. The cost of living has gone up, but so have our earnings, and so have our appetites for newly affordable luxuries. We spend most of our discretionary income on things like streaming, computers, cell phones, internet service, gourmet food, subscriptions. Many of these expenses simply didn't exist in the eras where our birth rate was still at replacement level. I remember Michael Knowles pushing back on the notion that children are too expensive by pointing out that if we cut out Netflix and a couple other luxury services, it could be affordable. People responded by acting like he had suggested they should saw off their own limbs. Our priorities have been irrevocably shifted. A life without these luxuries feels like austerity. The funny thing is, while we can't imagine our lives without these luxuries, they haven't made us happy. They've become the new baseline of our everyday experience, to which we feel ever more entitled. From an outsider perspective, the deep malaise of the current age could seem ridiculous, given how much prosperity we have at hand. But to write it off, to say these people are spoiled and selfish, misses the diagnosis. Rapid upsets in our social and economic order lead to gains in some places at the expense of others. The key to understanding the present mood is to contemplate the cost of our current moment. As we prosper, we lose our grit. As things get easier, as paths are smoothed out before us, we get squishy and malcontented. We intuitively understand this about children. We know that spoiling them not only makes them weak, but also unhappy. It's the same for us. Struggle and challenge and some amount of suffering are the conditions we need to become formidable. The downside of our world becoming more and more comfortable is that we lose our fortitude in the face of inevitable, necessary difficulty. When we encounter a problem that requires giving up some measure of what we've gotten used to, it feels impossible. And paradoxically, as these problems shrink in frequency and severity, they only come to feel more pointed when they do occur. In other words, the better conditions become, the more despair we feel about the problems that remain. As societies get richer and safer, they also become more neurotic and pessimistic. Maybe this psychological loop is impossible to break through. Maybe utter catastrophe, of the sort that annihilates most of our creature comforts and security, will be the only thing that breaks the spell. Maybe our ideology will be the one that rises out of the ashes. Maybe complete desolation will force us to long for a better future, and that hope will translate into a renewed desire to have children. Perhaps there is no solution to the fertility crisis. Maybe we are steadily sliding into a shambolic extinction. Maybe some pockets of people will muster the spiritual and physical strength to reverse the decline, and such people will inherit the earth. I don't expect to know either way anytime soon, but the consequences are cropping up quickly. And if a reversal is possible, it will have to begin sooner than you might think. Not a lot of what I've said here is groundbreaking. It's probably something you've thought about or heard others discuss. What I hope you take away is a healthy skepticism about approaching the birth rate issue as primarily an economic one. Whether or not the people in our nation have enough money will not determine our attitudes about having children. I realize it's easy to take this as a personal criticism. People are sensitive about being told that they are not as poor as they think they are. People struggle financially, and it's uncomfortable to examine how your priorities, values, and choices shape the way you experience your economic status. This is not about blame. This is not a blanket condemnation of boomers or millennials or Gen Z. It's easy to assume people in the past had it easier than you. But there's a better choice than using your present struggles, no matter how genuine or imagined, to justify forsaking the future. The future is worthwhile. The world must be peopled.